Hi, I'm Armin Razavi, and I'm here with Tiankai Feng, an esteemed polymath who's done a lot of different things. Hello, Tiankai. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So just to give you an introduction to Tiankai, Tiankai's work, he's a global director of data and AI strategy. He actively champions the often overlooked human element of data strategy through musicals. He has written a fantastic book called Humanizing Data Strategy and Humanizing AI. He is best known for his 5C framework, which I'd love to discuss a little bit more. He writes music, he sings, and he's even written a children's book, Robbie Just Wants to Help. So there's a lot to talk about and a lot to explore with you, Tiankai. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So Tiankai, just give us an introduction about yourself, what you've been up to, how you got into data and AI, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think also to your basically statement about me being a polymath, that's really interesting because I usually introduce myself by saying I'm a data and AI leader by day, I'm a musician at night, and I'm an optimist at heart, right? And that kind of captures usually in one sentence who I am. And how I got into data and AI is a really interesting one too, because in a way it was a very linear process, first and foremost, because I did study basically marketing and database systems back in my basic university years. And that led me into the space of marketing analytics. And from marketing analytics, and grew into other data and analytics disciplines. At some point, I went into data governance, data strategy, and a lot of the data use cases were AI. And then I got more into AI strategy and governance. So all of that came together, and now I'm basically leading AI data and AI strategy initiatives all in all. But over the whole time, right, I was always a musician, but I was always also paying attention a lot to the human aspect of things. Especially realizing that the technology can be as great as we want it to be, but if the human beings don't communicate and don't collaborate with each other in the right way, it's going to fail no matter what, right? So it all depended on people actually getting along, listening to each other, and actually making choices together. And that has still and is still very much true even in the world of AI, right? Where in the end, it still comes down to if humans are signing it off or seeing this as valuable or not, for all of us to actually come together and drive this to success. So this became a little bit my mix of being human-centric, but really focusing on data and AI technologies, and also using music and other ways to make it more approachable and fun.
Yeah, there's a lot to unravel there. Let's start with data. Let's start with the foundation thing. What do we mean by data, and how does it work in everyday life, but also in organizations, small to big? What's the problem with data, and why do we need to even talk about it?
Yeah. I mean, data basically is everything that we capture as records about anything that's happening in the world, right? First and foremost. And in a commercial and organizational context, that often means it's data that we capture about transactions, about specific objects and assets that we have, and about any kind of relationship that we see. Right? So for example, we talk about data that is about products and services, but we also talk about data that is transactional, about when things make people make purchases, et cetera, et cetera. I think in the traditional sense of it all, we all usually meant structured data, right? By that, I mean really tables, right? It's always like basically spreadsheets of things of listed all down with different attributes and so on and so on. But in the new world of data, I think it's much more driven also by unstructured data, meaning actually PDFs and videos and pictures and all these kind of things. That is also in a way now data. And especially in a world with a lot of generative AI, this has now become a big thing as well. So all in all, right, it's basically the philosophical question of how do we reflect the real world in information that we can digitally access and manage, and how do we turn this into a value? And the whole thing about it is that data for the longest time had been just a side product, right? It's just been something we did something, and the side product was captured somehow in like a spreadsheet or not, right? And so then we realized at some point, and that's when the wave of big data happened, right? We have so much information and data about things. Why we're not using it to do more things with it? And that's where it got really interesting, because it clashed the world of initial purpose with operations into let's analyze data and make things out of it. And I think now in this world of AI, it all comes together very nicely, where it's never faster than ever before analyzing and using and creating new data all at the same time, thanks to AI, that now this world driven by AI is putting a lot of spotlight onto data management and data strategies.
Yeah. Just incidentally, just going back to your definitions of data, what's the difference between data and information? Because a lot of times people talk about information technology, information architecture, information management, and then you have the data as well. So what's the difference between the two?
Absolutely. I mean, if I would describe it, it's the difference lies in the existence of context of data, right? So when data is just a table, we can imagine that it's very cryptic, right? So you have like all kinds of column names that is just acronyms of stuff. And every column has a bunch of values that might go from numbers to text to all kinds of things. And without any explanation of it, it just looks like something weird, like a table, right?
Yeah.
And by then putting context on it, right, this table actually represents our customer database from years 2025 to 2026, and it includes all of the customers with active contracts with us. Then suddenly you have context, and all of that becomes information suddenly, right? Because then we know, okay, this is actually what it all means, and this is what we can do with it. So for me, it really is the matter of the information becoming interpretable in data, and by providing the additional context on it, makes it actually information.
Excellent. And you must have worked with lots of different organizations. Have you ever been in an organization that has a good handle of their data and understands the information that the context of that data represents?
That's a great question. The funny thing is that if you ask any data professionals or most data professionals, there's a pattern of them all being very self-critical, because no one ever admits they're doing great in data management. They always say, oh, it's really hard, we're really struggling, even if they're doing really well already, right? So me as even now worked in consulting for 2.5 years, right, I can actually have a more outside view of things. And I do think that some companies are doing much better than others. And I think what is usually the pattern that I'm seeing there is that companies that by nature already are more organized around their basically assets, like especially in regulated environments, are better at it. Same as with those that are already natively technology driven, right? Like any of those digital native banks, for example, or like e-commerce, for example, they are by nature just better because they have it already in their DNA as part of it. So in a way, it's usually when companies are struggling with it, it's because the data side was too detached from the business side, right?
Yeah.
But the more it was already like combined and integrated, the easier it is to actually get a handle on data.
Yeah. So you're saying, just to paraphrase what you're saying, so you're saying if a company is regulated, if a company's under a lot of control from the outside, then they have to have good data structures and good understanding of the data. Or if a company is brand new and they start from a blank piece of paper, then again, they have the opportunity and they can do that because they have less systems. But I've worked with organizations that are very complicated, non-regulated, and just a mishmash of everything goes through acquisitions, through years of legacy systems and multiple systems and so on and so forth. So they don't have a good understanding of data, and unless they just throw everything away and start from scratch. So that means that there's different levels of structure, different levels of management of data, which allows us to have a better context of what their information is.
Absolutely. And I do think also, to what you just said about those complicated big corporations, it is in the end also a cultural problem, right? Like from an organizational culture point of view, about how people are willing to do the, let's say, documentation work on their own already and writing things down, how much they're willing to put things in an organized way together. You notice that from other angles too, not only from a data management point of view, right? But they're very much reflected in how these organizations manage data. So when they have not been that organized and not been focused on it too much before, then we shouldn't be surprised if data management for them, for example, is a very big challenge.
Yeah. So in a sense, the complexity of the organization, the complexity of the pressures on the organization means that data is different levels of maturity and access. So then that brings us on to AI. So then how does AI work against these different levels of complexity?
Yeah. So in a way, right, there's a symbiotic relationship between data and AI, because on the one hand side, most of the real needle moving AI use cases need to leverage internal data from the organization to be really valuable, right? So imagine that you create like a product recommendation engine for an e-commerce website. So it really needs to have strong product data, right, to actually even be able to recommend the right data. And it needs really strong customer data to know who to recommend products to, right? And if both of these data sets are not great, right, and you have really badly managed product data and customer data, then all the recommendations are going to be wrong too. And then you're not only selling less, but you're also breaking the trust with customers, for example, right? So it has a whole chain event of a relation happening there. So basically, getting your data straight in the right way and quality and usability for AI is really critical nowadays. The other side of it is that we're using the AI a lot to create new data as well, and how to manage data, right? So every day, lots of people are generating new images and new tables and new documentations and new text, right, all over the world. And all that is captured in data as well, right? So suddenly we have this engine that is at scale, super fast, creating lots and lots of new data at any time. So the question is, how do we manage that, right? And how can we use also AI capabilities to help us structure data, right? There are like tools like data profiling and data management tools that are smart now that actually can help us with that. But it's like kind of this relationship, right? Like of data for AI and AI for data, where it gets really interesting of how the two interact with each other. But we have to focus on both, right? Like getting data right for AI and getting AI right for the data itself.
Yeah. So a lot of CEOs that I've met and CFOs and CIOs would say, okay, we've got to keep up with all the other companies. We've got to get into AI.
Yeah, exactly.
What you're saying is they've got to go to the foundation level of making sure they understand their data, they understand where it sits, what it does, and how it does. I guess what would you call that approach? That's data governance, right?
Yes, it is data governance, but in a much more broader sense, it's really just a strategic approach, right? And by strategy, I mean focusing on the why before focusing on the what, right? And AI is a what, it's not a why, but the why is what all of us should answer first, right? Why do we need AI? For what are we using it for, right?
Yeah.
And that is, I think, what you're talking about, right? Like focusing on use cases, thinking about our business process, thinking about where we actually want to apply AI to solve specific challenges or address certain opportunities that we have, and then drive value with it. And that is, I think, the part that many CEOs are probably skipping in their head. And they're like, let's jump to implementing AI first, and then we see what we use it for. But it's in the wrong sequence, right? And that is, I think, what the main challenge is.
Absolutely, yeah. And then so that brings us on to your book about humanizing data strategy and humanizing AI. How do we humanize all this, and what does that actually mean?
Yes, I mean the humanizing part of it all, right? Contrary to what I think some people believe what it means, it's not about that we make AI feel more human, right? Because I feel like this is now what can be interpreted from it too. It's actually about humanizing the strategy around AI, right? And what I mean by that is really to make AI valuable by involving people in it and making them part of the journey, and using people also as a feedback mechanism to basically to verify if this is valuable or not only from a commercial sense, but also from a human sense, if it's fulfilling our day-to-day more and helping us to be more purposeful in how we spend our time, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's implied with this that it's really the counterpart to saying that AI is going to replace people, because that is the wrong narrative from my point of view, right? It's supposed to help human beings, and that doesn't mean that people will still keep doing the same thing, but they should get the opportunity to grow because of that. And they are giving all the chance now to evolve in their jobs, because AI can take away some of the most boring and tedious tasks from us, right? So we as human beings can feel more fulfilled at work. And that's one of the key messages from the book for me to say, how do we get there, right? How do we make that actually happen?
Can you give an example where this could be applied?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a typical one is we have a lot of knowledge workers in organizations, right? Those knowledge workers that in some more modern cases are mapping one Excel file to another Excel file manually, right? Like just like, okay, now I get this new monthly Excel file. I'm going to move field to field into this other Excel file. of course, that's highly automatable, right? That's something where it might not even need to be AI, but in some cases it needs to be AI because of interpretations. It'd be use case. And instead of now saying, now we replace this whole person with an AI, that person can be the product owner of that solution, right? Of how that actually matches the different Excel files and how it works there as well, right? Same as with like some other ideas from the traditional commerce side, where there are still people ordering via fax machines, and that needs to be translated into digital records, right? And some people are really literally still sitting there and manually typing from a fax into a computer about what that is. Of course, we have OCR and all these technologies now who can help with that with highly accurate rates to actually do that. And that person, again, can become the interface and the product owner of those kind of solutions. And the whole idea is that people become more orchestrators, guides, trainers, and owners of these solutions, rather than being the executors now of these kind of things. And that is where the real opportunity is. And we shouldn't act that this is not needed, right? Because we still need human accountability and human oversight in the end. So if we just say we're going to replace everyone with this, then we also imply there's no oversight anymore. And that is, I think, where I really want to draw the line to say, no, this is still important and we need to find a balance there.
Yeah, I think those are really great examples. I mean, I used to work for a company, a retail company, that in the warehouses there was no automation. So somebody would do a stock control every day and send a photo to someone in head office, and then they would type from that saying we've got 35 Mars bars or 25 Kit Kats. And then they realized if they take a picture of that and feed it into AI, the AI can fill out the Excel sheet. And of course, you have to go and the operator has to go and check to make sure that it could read the handwriting correctly and the numbers were correct. But yeah, so it's automating a manual, it's still manual process, but in just giving a little bit of extra time and efficiency to workers.
Exactly.
Okay, so is that the 5C approach, the 5C framework? Does that come into it? Can you explain what you mean by the 5Cs and talk us through it?
So the 5Cs is more of a framework just to address the human needs and traits that we all have in us and that we can apply to make basically things more human-centric in data and AI. And the 5Cs are competence, collaboration, communication, creativity, and conscience, right? And all of that, again, don't sound that groundbreaking, but it's more about applying them more intentionally in any AI initiatives. So for example, with competence, it's much more about knowing what is possible, what isn't possible with AI, but also knowing what human in the loop means, because you need the right qualified human being at the right moment in AI processes to actually create that human oversight, right? With collaboration, for example, it's a lot more about not on how humans together in different departments need to cross-functionally make AI work and valuable, but also what does it mean to collaborate with AI models and AI agents in the future, right? What is the role of the human being? What is the role of agents? And how does collaboration in the future look like? Then we have communication, right, which is all about basically how we communicate around AI, and not only from an organizational sense to position AI as a value lever and not as a cost-cutting principle, right? And also how we communicate using AI to each other and how we let AI communicate on their own to different customer groups, for example, and internally. Then we have also creativity, which is all about what does creative work mean in the world of generative AI, how human beings have disruptive creativity versus basically machines having incremental creativity, and how we need that relationship to have truly original ideas, but then using AI to implement and execute faster. And conscience, it's really all about being ethically and compliance related on the right side, right? Doing the right thing and thinking about the potential negative consequences and preventing the worst from happening, and applying our moral compass basically on things to avoid that we let AI actually break things.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a challenge. Could you go through the 5 Cs and give me examples of where you've applied these 5 Cs in the work that you do?
Sure. I think with competence, right? We can start with a use case I had was about fraud detection, right? So it was basically about an e-commerce and a retailer, and they wanted to flag specific transactions as fraud. And they didn't want to overdo it, though, right? And basically have still everything flagged. but they don't want to underdo it just in case any fraud action works, right? And then they have problems. So the whole idea was, how do we actually define a threshold where there's a human in the loop needed and where a fraud analyst would need to come in to actually check things. So it was about, we identified who the right person is, who would be the fraud analyst, but then we had to use basically empirical learnings, right, from fraud in the past to identify thresholds of what might be recognized as fraud and what the rules are to then implement it. And then we needed to train basically that fraud analyst and all define a process behind it. But then that fraud analyst had the competence to actually be the right human in the loop to actually help with that, right? Communication is typically a lot to do with customer-facing AI use cases like chatbots for after sales and customer service, right? So for example, for an insurance company, there was a client, they of course have a lot of customer service use cases. And so basically the idea was, how can we already filter a lot of the requests, but with automatic answers, and those that cannot be answered by a chatbot then only get escalated to a second level support by a human being, right? And basically capturing from actual communication data that we see how to use the right wording, how to identify the right wording, and how to talk basically to customers in the right way was a big deal about communication, but also how we internally use different words in the organization than we externally use and how to map that. So we have the internal and external one. That was a big topic around semantics, basically, how we drive communication the right way. Then the next one is collaboration, right? Collaboration really was all about, I would say, let me think about the use case. Right, with agents, right? So for example, there was this one use case where for a manufacturer where it was about an RFP analyzer, right? The whole idea was that whenever there was a request for a proposal, it would be automatically analyzed to then recommend already products that would need to be sold. And the question then was, what is the role then of the human being that is selling, right? The salesperson that is actually doing it, and how do they collaborate with the agents to make it happen, right? So finding that way of when an approval is needed and when kind of a check is wanted was really important there, and to then collaborate also around the whole procurement process and the quotation process was really an important one. With creativity, a lot is happening in the publishing sector, right? So in that one, was this, for multiple clients actually, the topic of, can we create flexible content, right? Imagine they have this library of all the publishing content they had in the past, and now they want to reuse it for different purposes and use AI basically to reshape the content, no matter if it's text or pictures, to crop it or to restructure it, to then use it for other publications, right? To basically, that became a big kind of topic of, what is the human creativity in it all, right? Can we actually translate all of the use case specific reformatings into rules, or do we actually need a human being to be creative to think about it? So we found that kind of balance, right? To say, okay, now we need human input to give guidance, but then we let AI execute what it actually looks like in reality, but it goes through a human creativity guidance first before we actually let it do it on its own. And that worked really well. And conscience, lastly, is really all of the AI governance products that we have, right? Where it's mostly compliance driven, I have to say. So it's really about, how do we classify risks of different AI use cases? How do we avoid making mistakes, right? What happens if we have incidents that are happening, and how do we deal with that? And creating the process around it. So that's all about the conscious aspect. I hope that those were like examples for each of the 5 Cs.
Yeah. Fascinating examples, and it seems they neatly fall into those 5C categories. Just on the very last one, I mean, we could talk about each one of those over and over, and we'll be here for 5 hours.
Yeah.
But on the conscious side of things, how do you see and this is a topic that we come back to over and over again in conversations on AI. How do you see regulatory pressures or regulatory regulations by governments of different, EU Act, the US and the UK, and how do you see that working against ethical considerations when we talk about bias, ethical concerns with AI, and so on? Are those two congruous, or are they completely separate things?
I think most of the time they are really integrated, right? I feel like most of the compliance-related aspects come from an ethical concern point of view, right? And that is why these kind of regulations exist. But I would actually phrase it in like a direction how we spend efforts, because compliance mostly is dealt with reactively, right? This new law is coming, so we better get ready for it. It's very a reactive one. The ethical approach is to thinking ahead, right? What might go wrong, and how do we maybe hurt society by doing this, even if there are no laws against it, right? But are we maybe creating something bad here? What could be the consequence of doing this? And this is where I think that's really interesting, because ideally we should be more proactive and not just listen what the law says, because there's just too much unknown around what AI might cause and what it might not cause, because we haven't seen all of the scenarios yet, right, of all the use cases. So thinking about that, I would just say the difference is how we look back into how we get ready for something, or do we want to be by default already be on the right side of history? And this is where I would put the ethical, but also sustainable view on things as well.
Why do you think AI is different from other technological changes? So why do we? So when the internet came out, we didn't spend this much time thinking about the ethical issues. Yes, regulatory, copyright laws, all of those things came into consideration, but we didn't think about ethics. Or
Yeah.
even when the car came about, the horses were got rid of. No one was thinking ethically about these issues.
That's
Why do you
true.
think AI is different?
I think the main reason is that if we compare to the internet was a big technology disruption, but it mainly made information available to everyone, right? So everyone had suddenly access to all kinds of information. But AI has this additional power now to make actual decisions and actions about human lives, right? And what I mean by that is, for example, using AI to do a credit scoring, right? Or using AI to diagnose cancer. And all these kind of things suddenly have a real impact on human beings, right? And I think the risk of doing it wrong is just too high, right? Once the machine does anything wrong, we cannot blame the machine for it. We have to look into which human responsibility there is that actually something like this could have happened. And I think this is where I think it gets really interesting. You brought up the nice example with cars, with horses versus motors, right? Which of course back then wasn't as big. But if we think about autonomous cars nowadays, right? That is exactly the same ethical concern we have, right? Where if a car that's driving automatically without a driver is hurting a human being, whose fault is it, right? And that is, I think, where all of these companies are struggling with, right? Because we haven't really solved it completely yet. The consequence is now that all these autonomous cars are just driving more slowly and a bit more cautious and overcautious almost, right? And that's how we save it. But that is exactly the same question. That is the right analogy to think about. What happens if those things create harm to human beings? What do we do then, right? And I think this is where we're at with AI. It is so easy to have create harm for other human beings. So how do we prevent that from ever happening?
Yeah. Look, I mean, we could spend an hour on each one of those things, but just going back to creativity. So you do a lot of creative work. Do you use AI in your day-to-day work and in your creative work?
Yes, I do. But I
Yes.
think to a degree that I feel still comfortable with, and where my artistic integrity is still intact, I would say, right?
What's
And
your
what I mean by,
threshold? How do you
yeah.
decide?
So just for example, I wouldn't let AI completely write lyrics for my songs, but
Right.
I would already have a big idea and I would write it all down. But then I would have struggles to come up with like words that rhyme, for example, right? So I would specifically ask, can you give me another combination of how to make it rhyme? And it gives me like 10 ideas, and I would choose one of them and then adapt it, right? That is like the degree, for example, that I do it. Same as with like when I produce music on my iMac using Logic as a software, then I basically ask AI to say, I want to make it sound like a specific genre. Let's say an 80s music with a nostalgia vibe, but with like heavy synthesizers. Could you give me a few ideas on how I can tweak the sound of the instruments in my studio so it sounds more like the 80s? So it would give me some hall and reverb ideas and that kind of thing. And then I would use that, for example, right? Like, but I know already what it's supposed to sound like and what kind of instruments I want to have. So this is the thing where I know what I want very explicitly what I want, and I just let AI help me to get there faster instead of having to figure it out on my own much slower. So this is where I'm doing it. I do use also sometimes Zuno as like a music generation tool, right? But that is really more for fun and just to see what's possible. That's my experimentation head on, just to see what I can do with it and to quickly have a joke with friends, for example, right? That is kind of how I would use it for.
Do you feel like you trust AI more on a day-to-day basis or less?
Then less, more or less than.
So as you've used these tools, and these tools become more, better and more efficient and more creative. Let's say more creative. Do you feel like you trust them more to co-create with you or to assist you?
I wouldn't say I trust AI more or the models more. I think I am growing myself into trusting myself more, knowing how to interact with AI. I think that's the actual growth that's happening. Right?
What does that mean? That's fascinating. I'd love to know what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is that I know exactly now what I want to get out of AI, meaning I create my own custom skills, my own custom instructions towards AI on how I want to interact with it. And I create my own guardrails, and I know exactly now how I need to say it out loud and basically use it to get what I want from AI. Which means it's not the AI that got much stronger. I mean, surely it got more faster and more powerful, but it's me who grew actually into knowing how I phrase my own needs and my own wants into instructions to now know how to deal with it the right way. And in that way, I do trust the output more, but it's more thanks to myself trusting my own input more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you've trained yourself to be more, to use AI more effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. It'll be great to write a book about that and how that process works.
And yes, I think a lot of people have written about it, but yeah.
Perfect. Let's talk a little bit about your creativity. Which song are you most proud of? What song do you like the most?
Yeah. I think the song I'm most proud of is called Governors of Data, and it's a rap song about data governance. And the reason why is because it was the most unexpected success from all the songs that I created. I think it has by far the most views across all music videos. It has like 47,000 views now at this point already, which for a song about a niche topic like data governance, I have never imagined ever to happen, right? But what happened is that this one song became that anthem for a whole generation of professionals working in that area. And all of those data governance professionals feel represented by that song. And they have a chance to communicate it in a more fun and entertaining way than having to explain it with slides or dry documentation, right? And I realized that this is what actually I'm good at as well, right? But that is the most I'm proud of, because not only did I create something that everyone can stand behind, but also I made something that is explaining data governance to people who don't know what it is in a fun way. And it's catchy too. Many people tell me how they cannot get the basically chorus out of their heads anymore after listening to it. So I think I'm really the most proud of that song.
Yeah.
D-A-T-A, letters that we live by. In a world that's digital, we chose the data life. Enterprise-wise, the data flows left and right. We are the ones who keep it all in our sight. Rules, policies, principles, guidelines. Not the most sexy, but better than the stop signs. Working the segue between business and tech. 1 foot in each world, all data in check. Data quality, data quality. No day goes by without this terminology. We know end-to-end how data works best. We set up the rules and the business does the rest. Governance of data, defect terminators. Good data comes first and the rest will follow later. We know what is right, so let's make the data flow. We're role models of excellence. Let's govern it, let's go.
So I know a few data governance leads, and I work with them as well. So I will definitely share them with them.
Awesome.
I will make mandatory training for data governance leads in order to be better. But tell me about music. Why do you make music? What drives you to make it?
Yeah. I mean, I started playing piano when I was 5 and took lessons already then, right? So it started in my life already very early on. And it was until I was a teenager then where I started creating my own songs. And I was part of many different music bands and orchestras and jazz bands and so on. And I basically gained a lot of experience as a performer, but also as a songwriter in that time. In my studies, I then was a bar pianist to earn my rent, basically, for where I was living and so on. So I had like my music set always with me. So in a way, it was always a part of me, right, for the longest time. Even longer than my data and AI career, I was a musician at heart the whole most of the time. And I think it was not only until the COVID time hit that I was so frustrated at home that I started recording music videos in my home office, and I posted it on the intranet, that my colleagues liked it so much that they encouraged me to post it publicly on LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. And it gained much and much more traction. So suddenly I was known as the data and AI musician, and that people encouraged me to write more songs and create more things and record more videos. And I'm really glad that I now get to bring my musical hobby side into my professional side, and I get to do that, right? I mean, I've stood on many stages as a pianist and singer and a keynote speaker now over the last years. And I'm really happy that I'm able to do both at the same time.
That is fantastic, and I will definitely put some clips from your music there. You also write books for children. Tell me about how your book came about, and what does it mean? So Robbie just wants to help.
Exactly.
Tell me more about that book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I had already in the last 3 years written 2 books for adults, right? Humanizing Data Strategy, Humanizing AI Strategy, as you mentioned. And after finishing those 2 books, I felt like I already wrote down everything I wanted to say about this area, right? And at the same time, I felt like I want to do something more meaningful with my creativity and not write another nonfiction book. It's a little too stressful for me now. And I was spending basically end of last year on the Christmas holidays, basically with the family, spending quality time with them. And I thought about how I want to teach the generation of my sons basically AI literacy a bit more. And I want to teach them a little bit, not only either the super beautiful side of it, where everything is great, and not the doom side of it, where everything is horrible, but something more nuanced. And I thought about how I would write it as a story that is fiction and that is basically putting in there also my heart and soul a little bit. And I talked to the same publisher, Takings Publications, to discuss the idea, and they really liked it. And yeah, it became a thing called Robbie Just Wants to Help. The interesting thing is the main characters in the book are my 2 actual sons. Their names are Sky and Cloud, and they are the actual main characters in the book. And Robbie, of course, is a fictional robot, but he is representative of AI, right? So, and what happens are Sky and Cloud are asking Robbie to help at home with a lot. And although Robbie always wants to help, he does a lot of things wrong because they have to learn how to interact with Robbie first and how to teach it, how to do things the right way. And in that way, I want to teach basically children and the next generation on what the pitfalls of dealing with AI is and how to actually get it in the right way. So yeah, I'm really happy that it came out and that now there's a book also that not only is helping the next generation to learn about AI, but also it's a family project now that's out, right? And my sons will always be remembered as characters in the book too.
That is fantastic. How do your children, I don't know if they're old enough, but do they interact with AI, and what's their relationship with AI?
They're only 5 and 7, so to be honest, not a lot on their own yet. But of course, here once in a while, I do something with them together under my guidance, right? Like if they want to, like just for fun, create like a little bit of an HTML-based game because they came up with it, then we do it together and we wipe code some little thing. Or they really want to just understand some topic very deeply, and so I basically ask AI to help to generate that knowledge, and we can talk about it together. And these kind of things, right? I think they are really seeing a lot of the possibilities with it. But at the same time, I taught them early on to spot where it feels off with AI output, right? So, for example, like years ago, it was still about that images would be generated where people have 6 fingers or things are a little off, right? And now they are on their own actually looking at what might be off. When the text sounds wrong or when an image looks wrong for some reason, they're now having a very critical eye on it. And I like that a lot, right? Where they like enjoying the possibilities, but they're also very critical about looking at what's possible and what isn't possible.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why we are having this conversation was conversations on AI about young people's access to AI and how they use it. What is your hope for your children's generation and their relationship with AI?
Yeah, I mean, my hope is, of course, that they use AI for good things and for things that help them grow and help them create positive impact in the world, and not so much malicious ones and negative ones, including on their own, right? I think on the one hand side, don't use it for hurting others, right? Because it's so easy to do that. But also don't let it basically destroy your own critical thinking and your own creativity if you only rely on AI nowadays. So that is, I think, the hope that I have for the next generation, where we really double down on our most human skills of what we're good at, and we use AI for what we don't want to do and where we can actually use the help.
So that's your hope. What do you think is actually going to happen?
I mean, I'm an optimist, as I said, right?
Right.
I believe this is happening. My only example I have is that with the calculators that we had, right? We also still let everyone learn math and do calculations in their head without having to rely only on calculators nowadays, right? So figure it out how to use technology the right way, but keep certain skills in our heads. And I believe that this is a really strong sign that we as humanity and this society can still keep that balance as well when it comes to AI.
But there is, just to take the pessimistic side, there is a backlash. There's a backlash of young people, some who are craving for authenticity. Normal cameras, film cameras are now becoming more prevalent. Record players with LPs are becoming, popular again with young people. Do you think this backlash is just a Luddite kind of reaction to AI, or do you think there is going to be some benefit from this backlash?
I think there will be a benefit, actually. Most times when we feel an appreciation for things in the past, it also comes with learning for what makes it so great that we want to take into the future, right? A lot about it, like that's why we learn history, literally, right? That we know what we as human beings did wrong in the past, like slavery and so on, right? So we want to avoid it forever in the future, right? Like we learn from the past and then move on to the future. And I think the same applies to technology usage, right? That in the past, a lot of bad things have also happened, and now we should actually learn from it to not let it actually happen when it comes to AI. So having young people spend more time with the past and actually with artifacts and technologies from the past, I think is only a good thing, because they not only see basically those stories and the learnings, but they also know how hard it was in the past. So they might appreciate AI actually from turn days actually also even more. Yeah.
So you're at the forefront of consulting on AI and looking at the immediate to medium term future of AI. But if you were in charge of everything, and you could foresee what's going to happen, how do you think in 10 years' time we're going to have our relationships with AI will change? Are we going to have robots like Robbie in our households, where we train them and we manage their data, manages our day to day, or is there going to be a kind of diluted approach to collaboration with AI, or something else? What do you think the future holds?
I do think we would have a more stable and healthy relationship with AI, is how I would call it, right? Having robots at home or not, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 years. It feels like there are a lot of nice demos, but once you put them in the real world, they're still struggling, right? So I doubt that a little bit how much progress is going to be made in the next 10 years about robotics. But in a way, we're all going to be used to it more. And we know now, I hope, that how we can use it for better or worse, right? And we know then at that point, it becomes a habit on how to use AI, right, in the next 10 years, and for the good things. What I do hope much more is, though, that AI in 10 years has helped us solving some of the world's biggest issues, right? No matter if it's cancer research or preventing forest fires or exploring space, right? Anything of that would be great if AI could help us, right? Because then we actually solve the big problems that we are all struggling as society to struggle with. And if suddenly that can help us, then that would be really nice. Yeah, that is my hope, at least.
That's a fantastic hope for the future. So we're almost coming towards the end of our talk here. Is there anything that we should have talked about and we didn't? Is there anything we missed that you would want to tell the viewers?
Not really. I think, like, maybe the one thing I would say is that when it comes to AI, right, there's a lot of theoretical discussions around it. But the real knowledge that we should all have is practical of nature, right? And we should only by interacting with it and trying things out with it, then understand where the boundaries are and where the risks are to actually be well informed to deal with it the right way. So let's not spend so much time discussing concepts and abstract ideas about it, and let's interact with it equally as much so we can actually have a more foundational conversation about it that's rooted in reality. And I feel like otherwise this conversation is lifting off to a place that we don't really see it useful anymore. So let's keep it rooted also in reality. That would be the only thing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Look, Tiankai, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I haven't changed my mind. I still think you're a polymath with all the things that you do and the creative aspects. And I've seen your YouTube channel and hope the viewers go and check out some of your songs. You're incredibly creative, and your books are fascinating too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tiankai. Hope to talk to you in the future, maybe in person as well.
Yes.